means here in this column. So today, the nature of this call, the question that we're asking and the research that we're exploring is the science of ascension. What exactly that means. We've talked about ascension a lot. This is a mystery school after all, and this is ultimately one of the end goals of Spirit Mysteries. If we're thinking about what is the purpose of Spirit Mysteries, why are we here? What are we doing? What are we creating? Of course, we were out, evolving consciousness. We want to see the world change. We want to see our lives change in beautiful and transformative and healing ways, and help to bring, some sense of harmonious natural order back into the world, a world in which has become very disconnected from our souls, from nature, from source, from spirit. And part of this process is looking at, what's possible within the human life, within our, within the scope and field of possibilities. And it always ends up kind of coming back to this idea of ascension. What is ascension? What does that mean? And in a lot of ways, I think that we still are trying to figure that out. There's a lot of questions. There's stories of Thoth and Jesus and Horus and Osiris. These ancient deities or humans who transformed into deities in some ways. Hermes Trismegistus is another story. It's paralleling Thoth of a human who strove for cosmic wisdom and transcended to become a god in some way. So Jesus, of course, is the same thing, of a human who was endowed with so much virtue and took on the suffering of the whole world, and in doing so liberated himself from the bonds of mortality and became an ascended master. So the question then becomes, is it possible for us to learn how to do something similar? Is it possible for us to attain cosmic wisdom and learn how to, have what could only be described as supernormal powers of some way? There's many, many possibilities on what that could look like. Everything from just, heightened psychic abilities all the way to performing miracles of some kind. And it's such a big question because, the idea of, if consciousness is the ruling dominant force and we are endowed with consciousness, ruling force behind the universe, and we are endowed with consciousness, then is it possible that anything is possible? And in that case, is there even a limit to what we can achieve or experience within this life? And that's what we're going to explore today. And we're going to do so in a very practical way with some amazing science that some of you might even be familiar with, to see how we can both change our lives very practically in a beautiful way right now and do some amazing healing, groundbreaking work for ourselves today and moving forward over this next month and the years to come. But in that, also lay the foundation for an ascension path. So that's what we're going to be looking at right now. As always, as we start this Wisdom Moon, may each of us, let's take a moment now to call upon the spirit of our ancestors, to call upon the ascended masters, whoever it is who we want to be present with us, to share in the wisdom. If it's Thoth, Jesus, Isis, Horus, Osiris, maybe it's Zeus, any sort of cosmic consciousness, any deity in history, any being or spirit guide or spirit animal that we wish to have that cosmic support. Let us take a moment to just call that in, invite that in, so that we are entering into a sacred and holy space, that we're creating a sacred and holy space here and now on this call. We're exiting the mundane world. We're entering into a inner sanctum of Spirit Mysteries, of mystery teachings, to allow us to experience the highest state of consciousness that we possibly can, and invite us ourselves to step into that, to embody it. So it's not just that we're meeting these guides who are separate from us, but they are moving through us. Their wisdom becomes present within us, because ultimately this is the formlessness, the non-physical field, and how it works is that field can move through us. We become present with it within us. now we have our opening meditation. So in this space, while you are cultivating and calling in these guides, I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful Ben Burke, who will lead us in an opening meditation.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jordan. Thank you. So let's all just find our posture now. So straighten up our backs, find ourselves engaging our lower back muscles, roll the shoulders back just a little bit. Let's just begin some deep breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth. Let's find some softness. Soften in some way within yourself right now. In through the nose and out through the mouth deeply. Do this 2 or 3 more times, with each time going a little bit more deeply, slightly more filling up your lungs. Feel your lungs expanding more so than they do on a normal breath. Feel that sense of expansion within you. So much of the ideas shared today astrologically with the full moon, with the eclipse, that of the full moon in Capricorn is that of ambition, that of moving forward. And so this very short meditation is to connect in with your full potential, with your complete potential. And so allow your mind to connect with that idea. What does it mean for me to be in my fullest potential? What does it mean for me to feel right now as though I am fully actualized? There's nothing else for me to grab at. There's nothing else for me to achieve. I am acting on my fullest potential. Deep breaths. And feeling into your fullest potential of self. What is the greatest sense of self that you can experience? How expanded can you allow yourself to be? When you say, I am, who is it that you are referring to? Allow yourself to feel into your fullest potential of kindness. Kindness for yourself, for your work, for your service, and certainly for those around you. Are your thoughts an embodiment of your fullest potential of compassion? Just allow yourself to fall into that improvement, that betterment of yourself. Much of this Capricorn energy, much of the full moon energy is that of moving forward, being accountable for our actions, for our thoughts. We're only able to be accountable truly if we can connect in deeply with this full expression of ourselves. That is ultimately what we want to hold ourselves accountable for. Fully being here, fully being present. Couple more deep breaths in. Just exhale. Anything that isn't serving you, you don't have to know it or see it. Just intend it. Deep breath. Letting go of anything that is not serving you. A couple more times. And feel a sense of gratitude for yourself and showing up here today and participating in this meditation together. And thank you all.
Thank you so much, Ben. Now, as we continue entering into this sacred space, now that we've elevated, we've entered into this reality, we're going to theme our call, as we often do, with the card reading and just bringing these cards in, some Patch Tarot energy, so that we can take everything that we're reviewing and looking at today, all of the colors of the eclipse and the full moon and Capricorn, and even that we're still in Cancer season. We're going to look at all of these together through the lens, or with the additional lens of a card. And so, what we have is the King of Discs. Now, I'm going to stop screen sharing for just a moment here, and let me hide that so that I can see the Zoom window with everybody. Hey, it's everybody. So this, as you might be familiar with already, the King of Discs, for those who are unfamiliar with it, this is what it looks like. And the King of Discs often speaks to really determination. One of the powerful things about this card is that it is fire and earth mixed together. And there's no water in that. There's no air in that. So it's taking the spiritual energy, taking the spiritual will, and applying it directly to the physical domain, the physical dimension. There's not a lot of room for thinking about things or feeling about things. Not that those things are bad, but this card is about narrowing the focus of saying, there's a lot of work that has to get done, so I'm just going to do it. I'm going to get this work done. I'm going to make this thing happen, regardless of, how I may think or feel about it. I'm going to take all of that stuff and just kind of set it to the side. And I'm going to be very, very focused here on getting things done. So determination is a big part of this card, and tackling mountains is a big thing too, because that earth energy, you can even see on the card here, there's some mountains in the background, the sun is shining bright. And that is really that fusion of that the sun reaching the earth and facilitate, like the mountain energy is actually very interesting, because the mountain both relates with the earth, but it also is a masculine, this big, strong masculine force, in that it represents really like the power and the strength of the spirit and what spirit can create. And so as we go through today's workshop now, let us explore and consider and look at the King of Discs from that lens. And what does it look like? What does it feel like for each of us to have the presence and focus of what it is within our hearts, within the spirit that moves through us? What does it want? And how can we just do it and make it happen and bring those actions, bring that will to action and bring it into form without overthinking things or getting too caught up in our feelings and because that happens sometimes, right? In life, it's like maybe you want to do something, but the details and how is this going to turn out? And I don't know, maybe some self-doubt, and there's a lot of feelings, a lot of thoughts. This card is like, don't even worry about that. Do the thing. Is basically the energy of the King of Discs. So with that, I'm going to return to the screen sharing here. We're going to take that. We're going to be aware of the King of Discs now as we move forward. And let's look at the astrology of what's really going on right now. So our astral forecast, as we've been mentioning a few times here, we've got this full moon in Capricorn. And already I can see, one thing I didn't mention here, even with the King of Discs, is with the nature of the mountain, Capricorn really goes hand in hand, specifically because Capricorn is the sign of the mountain climbing sea goat, which is a funny correlation. It's a sea goat, but is often depicted in that climbing the mountain. And there's this is really about ambition and practicality, responsibility and focus. And for those of you who were here 2 weeks ago at our manifestation moon, here we also have the culmination of energies that we established with the new moon. So if you think back to 2 weeks ago and what intentions that you set, what what intentions were you intending to create and bring into your life, the full moon is a time of bringing that now into full focus, into full culmination. How are things going? And are you on track? And if not, this experience, this wisdom moon can help you to realign that track and get even more in alignment with your intention for yourself and your life. So the full moon in Capricorn also brings, being that, it's shining bright, the moon is illuminating by its nature, it brings our focus to our public lives, careers, reputation, and accountability, along with supporting us in receiving achievements and rewards or punishments for our effort. And you can also relate this, if you're familiar with the astrological relationship, to Saturn, because the Capricorn is ruled by Saturn. Then we can actually see that Saturn does the same sort of thing. It's related with achievements. It's also related with punishments, because there's a lot of responsibility in here. And if you fulfill your work, then you are rewarded in life. And if you don't fulfill your work, if you are lazy or you don't get your things done, then you are, quote unquote, punished. You are, withheld from the life of your dreams or what you're trying to create, because you're not bringing action to the dream, to the vision, right? Like, this is how law of attraction is often described, but we have to understand that as far as law of attraction goes, the believing and the feeling into your vision and dreaming a dream is only as powerful as your ability to actually act on it. And this, of course, brings us to the King of Discs here. And the nature of Capricorn is, yes, we want these things. We want to see our lives change and improve and have all of this and that and whatnot. But we have to be able to actually act on it. We have to be able to live with the behavior that can bring about those kinds of changes as well. It's a full spectrum. We need all of the elements working together, not just the ethereal ones. We need the practical, physical ones as well. Now, as you know, we are also in Cancer season. And so the polarity between Capricorn and Cancer brings awareness to our needs, lacks, and wants in life, and balance between our home life, which is our family, nurturance, and our inner state, and our public life, our career, reputation, and goals. So it's a time of urging us to observe this polarity within us, really between unconditional love and conditional love. And I even, as I was writing this, it was kind of like, I wonder how this will be received by people. It's like, what do you mean conditional love? I thought the spiritual thing is unconditional love and all the time. And at the highest level, yes, absolutely. But conditional love, essentially, especially as it relates to business and work and that Capricorn energy, really speaks to our ability to hold and honor our boundaries and self-respect. It's really about owning for yourself, being able to say, this is what my needs are. And that, it's like if you were on the street and random people started coming up to you and asking for, give me all your money and all of this kind of thing, right? There's sort of a conditional love in that of, you love them unconditionally, yes, but are you going to just, surrender your life to random strangers just because they've asked for it, right? Like, what is the condition upon which you are giving your whole, your money or your time or your everything to all of these people, right? You have to be aware of the difference in the vibrations of what other people's intentions are. And so this is the unconditionally loving yourself and the world, and then being able to establish at what level do you communicate with other people and hold yourself and other people accountable as well. And that's what we're speaking to when we say conditional love here. So in a simple sense, the whole thing really is just striving for harmony within our commitments to our career and our family. And the final page of our astrological forecast here is, of course, as we mentioned too, there's a lunar eclipse taking place, or has taken place just yesterday. And lunar eclipses are often very relationship oriented. We've actually gone through a few lunar eclipses because whenever they come, they generally tend to come in threes. So we've been experiencing quite a few lunar eclipses lately. And what that means is that in addition to all of this, this can shift the dynamic in relationships, and these changes can be positive or negative relationships, but we must be mindful that it's not just partnership relationships. It can be a relationship to anything. not just a significant other, as it's written here. This can be a time to shift your relationship with money, with work, with friends, or anything else. And this is, it's very interesting too, because even this week, this morning we shared a new Spirit Science episode, another part to our money series, which is really talking about how to change your relationship with money. And if you've gone through Spiritual Money Mastery, this is our new workshop that we've just launched, that really is exploring this. So you can just think about relationships in general, and even your relationship with yourself, which is what we're going to be really exploring here now as we get into the main, core meat and everything of this workshop. And finally, this is a time for things to come to light that have been brewing under the surface, right? We have the full moon and a lunar eclipse coming, as we bring those together, we can just kind of see this is really that time for the illumination of that which is hidden. We have the hiding of things and then the shining of the light at the same time. So we're going to be bringing things up to the surface and invite everybody to really bring things in, be present with them as you go through this day, go through this workshop, go through this day, and go through the next month. So now the final thing before we move on to the next slide, I would love to just invite Ben and maybe even Selena, if you guys have anything you'd like to add to the astrological forecast or the tarot card or anything here, we'd love to hear from you.
Sure. The notes that I was taking on the card, the King of Discs, one of the other ways that I'm feeling to view this transition point through this card today is connecting more so with our vision and our ambition, and this idea of not overreaching, the idea of really protecting your sacred vision. And so I think a lot of times we can think about the King of Discs as like this soldier, really going out there and almost brandishing the sword, and anything that gets in the way is being cut down and having this very kind of direct linear path. And that's certainly fair to feel into that, but I also feel into this sense of how sacred your own vision for your life is, how sacred it is that you have ambition, that it's not a nice to have, it's a need to have, and how there's a protecting, nurturing energy that this card brings up for me as well. So that's another lens that I was looking at. And then of course, as things come up with larger astrological cycles, like an eclipse that's in conjunction with the full moon, more so than just even a full moon, but the practice of really writing out what's coming up for us, that can be incredibly helpful into the idea of like really becoming more practically aware of the themes that happen. So most certainly, over the last 2 or 3 days, and likely today and tomorrow, most everybody, if they were to stop and take a moment to look at the themes that are coming up in their life right now, there's certainly things to look at. And so if we can continue to be in the practice of speaking it and writing it within ourselves, actually getting a piece of paper and saying, over the last 2 days, this happened and this happened and this happened, and this is how that I felt about it, we're going to be able to more tangibly work within ourselves to change them, to improve them. And so the sacred writing practices, journaling that we're all working on in some way, are extra important during the full moon time. And then the last point was just, I just really resonated with this looking at things as unconditional love versus conditional love, and ultimately choosing to unconditionally love yourself first as a first step is a wonderful exercise to get into in any moment that we're feeling out of alignment. Are we unconditionally loving ourselves right now? And I've just found that sort of meditation, that mindfulness moment, to be really, really helpful, because more times than not, that's ultimately what it is. I'm feeling upset, or I'm feeling frustrated, or I'm feeling out of alignment because I just have some conditions on how I want myself to be. That is to say, conditional love. So yeah, those were my 3 notes, Jordan. And appreciate everything you put together so far.
Thank you so much. One thing I really like everything that you said there, and you have helped me even just in this moment to understand unconditional and conditional love even better, especially as it relates with like work stuff. I think that this is a really good example of like your relationship with money, of saying like, you know, if let's say that, you know, you're employing someone or what have you, you know, conditional love would be kind of like, yes, I love you unconditionally forever, but I can only pay you if you do the work. I'm not just going to pay you for nothing, you know? So that's like the conditional relationship. What is the agreement? What is the exchange that we're creating here? So that was sort of one way that it was just appearing to me in that moment of like looking at more of like the practical exchanges that we have in our daily lives, and that there's a line there between, you know, and like just looking at how that translates from unconditionally loving yourself and the world and everyone, and then in your day-to-day, like the exchanges that you make, what are the conditions of those exchanges? And if you can see the exchanges as love, right, this is part of that relationship with money sort of thing. If we're looking at money as energy, and energy as a part of this great field of infinite universal love, then, but you know, you can't just go and give your, you know, your money to everybody and then you'd be out on the street. I mean, you absolutely could. Most people are not prepared for or willing to do that sort of thing. So we have to look at what are the arrangements, what are the exchanges that we're creating in our daily lives to create more value and service in the world, sort of thing. So this is really fun. Now, on this special Wisdom Moon, we have we've invited some of our team to come and join us here, and so we actually have one of our video editors, we have one of our animators, Nicola Ash. It's great to have you. We also have our writer, Chris Cogger, who is, you know, if you've seen any of our content in the last few months, Chris is basically the lead writer for all of this. He's also one of the lead researchers. And I told him, Chris, you have to come to this workshop because this is like research, because this is really important, everything that we're going to be talking about. So, you know, Chris is going to be probably making a script on this in the near future for some spirit science. But the reason I'm bringing that up is because I wanted to share, like, first of all, we're very serious. And I'm very serious when I say that I'm interested in learning the science of ascension. And, you know, Chris can back me up here too, of like, on a fairly regular basis, we have these calls or you know, chats inside of our messaging app to be like, all right, how would the quantum physics of this work? How do we solve for consciousness? How do we solve for gravity? How do we, you know, like, and all of these kind of things. And this is actually a very serious conversation that we have, and some very amazing conversations. And to bring this into a very practical thing for all of us here. And so, Chris, I might just like bring you in at some point to talk a little bit more about this, because you've been researching this like mad this morning. Where we're going to be starting and talking about is with the biology of belief. This is the work of Dr. Bruce Lipton. Again, some of you might be familiar with his work, and for those who are not, you are in for a treat, because this is really, really special. And this is where the science of ascension really begins. What really struck me, even just as I was learning this over the past week, I felt my mind being blown over and over and over. And so that's the intention I want to bring for everyone here today. So Bruce Lipton shares, here's a couple quotes from him just to get us started, is that we can control our lives by controlling our perceptions, and that your perspective is always limited by how much you know, right? They always say knowledge is power. So if you expand your knowledge, you will transform your mind. So if knowledge is power, then what we must be doing is actively striving to increase our knowledge every day. Every moment is, how are we growing? How are we learning? Now, the biology of belief begins kind of like, there's a little bit of a history here. See, for decades, genetic determinism was the prevailing view of the scientific community, especially as far as genes and life and DNA goes. And where life comes from, it was this idea that our genes are fixed, immutable, and outside of our conscious control. It was believed that genes controlled life, and thus to control life, because that's what all the scientists wanted to do, you must control the genes. You must be able to control the DNA. And this was a big shift that happened in biology and in the fields of science, because there was a big, you know, push and movement away from Christianity as the fundamental beliefs that people live their lives by. There were, mysteries of the universe that were, could be only ascribed by God, and that you couldn't question it. They were unquestionable things. But as science continued to unravel some of the cosmic mysteries, that the church began to be questioned. And when the church was questioned, it was sort of this chain reaction of, well, what about this? Can we question that? Can we question this? Can we question that? And the perspective of where life came from kind of entirely changed. The universe was beginning to be looked at as more of a physical mechanism rather than, something spiritual. So the church kind of had the spiritual perspective of the world, and science had the material perspective of the world, and this was becoming the new dogma. And so the question of, well, how does life happen, was essentially ascribed to, well, it must be inside the DNA. As microscopy looked at cells and got smaller and smaller, we started to look at DNA and what was inside of the cells. And they found these two kind of prevailing things, the proteins and the DNA. And they did some experiments, and they just kind of came to the conclusion, wow, it must be the DNA that's really the deciding factor of everything. So if you want to control life, you have to control DNA. And also that genes, they were noticing that genes were passed on from family to family and over kind of a hereditary kind of thing. So thus, if you struggled with a hereditary disease or problem, like a family-wide depression or anything, it was a result of your genes, and that you were just dealt a bad hand in life. And this was this pervading belief that people had because of science that just became this widespread knowledge. I mean, if your life sucked, sorry, you just have bad genes. So the pharmaceutical industry thrived on this model of science because thus the only way to affect the body and help people was really to prescribe drugs. There's nothing that you can do to change your genes. Sorry, your life is just bound to suck. And that's really going to be the outcome. But here, take these drugs and you'll feel at least maybe a little bit better, And the thing is very recently, this entire paradigm was shattered. It was completely, it really was shattered. But the results of that shattering are still being seen in the world today. People are just still learning to talk about this stuff, and it's starting to take hold in more and more scientific circles. But in the widespread sense, it's still not discussed as much as it should be. But So in order to really talk about how life actually works and how the cells actually work and everything, we have to talk about the DNA versus the proteins in the cell. So the only difference really between that which is alive and dead is motion. A dead thing doesn't move. Alive things move. And the motion is actually what Bruce Lipton found, and what his researchers found, was that motion is caused not by the DNA, but by the ability for the cells to receive signals, to receive information or energy coming from the outside. See, the DNA has a very specific role, but it's not what we think it is. The DNA is a blueprint, which the cell uses to produce new proteins when the old proteins break down. The DNA is not telling you what actively to do. It's just providing a blueprint so that the cell can can create the protein so that the proteins can make the things move. And it does this simply by making a copy of itself, which is RNA, and that releases into the cell, and then the cell uses the RNA to construct new proteins. Well, it's very clear, we must be very, very clear to say that the motion and the determining of what's causing motion is not from within the DNA itself. The cell's activity and all of its motion is governed by these proteins, which are dependent upon receiving signals from the environment. So put very simply, DNA is like the architectural blueprint to build a house, and the proteins are the actual workers who fulfill the work of the DNA, and the signals are the incentive for the workers to do anything. So one of the ways that he describes this is if you look at the protein like a wire, like a strand of wire that has been kind of twisted up into this folding, this very, very just messed up, twisted knot of a wire strand. That when you have a signal coming in to be received by the protein, the signal essentially merges with the protein, and that facilitates, it like merges with the protein and facilitates the protein to change its shape. As it's changing its shape, that is the motion, and that motion causes the entire cell to move. So before I continue here, we're going to talk about signals here, and this is, I know it's very scientific, but it's going to be, it really fits together into this beautiful picture. Chris, I want to invite you up here for a second too, of saying, am I missing anything, or is there anything very interesting or compelling to add so far into this area?
It depends on what your next slide is.
Signals.
Yeah, so the only thing really I would add is that when the signal is sent, the signal generally has a very profoundly positive charge. So if we think in terms of polarity, so we have positive and negative charges, and bear in mind this is kind of general polarity, so not positive and negative as in bad and good, but just general polarity. When the protein blocks come together and build, each protein block will have a certain charge, and generally the ones that come on the endings will have negative charges. So when the signal comes in, or rather one end of the protein will have a negative charge and the other will have a positive. When the signal comes in from elsewhere, whether you believe that elsewhere is the brain or a non-local location, whatever, when that signal comes in, that signal, if you think of it like a tennis ball, I think Bruce uses the example of like a ball or whatever, when it comes in, it has an overwhelming positive charge. So when it attaches to the proteins to make them move, it overwhelms the negative and the positive charge, or it neutralizes them out, but then the extra positive charge that comes along with the signal makes the protein average out as a mostly positively charged thing, which is what attracts them together, which is what makes them move, essentially.
Awesome. Yeah, the way that the ball example, to make it very simple and very clear and easy to understand too, is like the proteins are basically like a catcher's mitt, like a baseball glove, and the ball is a signal. And so the signal being thrown, is being received. The protein is like in a position where it's ready to receive. It's like the catcher's mitt ready to receive that thing. But the moment that it does, it becomes its own thing because it neutralizes that signal, just like Chris says, and it transitions. It kind of changes its form in that it becomes, the ball and the glove kind of merge together in this kind of example. So the question then is exactly what is a signal? So to be very clear, signals are anything that can be received from the outside, whether it's physical or non-physical. When you eat food, this is actually how digestion works. The cell receives the food as a signal. The food merges with the cells and the cells move, which we call digestion. So like the process of digestion is that overwhelming positive charge of that delicious cake that you just ate or whatever it is. And as your body receives it, it facilitates the cells in your body moving, changing shape, changing form, and moving into a new position. And that is the digestive process. Your body is absorbing the energy, and it takes energy to do it, to move. Feeling the warmth of the sun is also a signal. Like you just go outside and you feel the sun hit you and your skin just warms up and it feels really nice. That's a signal. That's your body receiving the signal from the outside, and it's changing the experience of your skin, of your body. And likewise, so is feeling a cool breeze or feeling cold. Is you can feel the coolness changing the cells inside of your skin as things maybe tighten up a little bit, or it gets cooler, it gets more contracted, but it's still receiving a signal that causes the tightening. But everything is a signal. Thoughts and feelings are also signals, and these are some of the most powerful signals that we have available to us because we're constantly sending them and receiving them with each other in a very personal, meaningful, and intimate way because they relate with how we personally think and feel, including our own thoughts and feelings. So the whole thing here is that we're constantly receiving hundreds of thousands of signals each and every moment of our lives. In this very moment on this call, there are so many signals coming from all over the place. And most of them are happening within the subconscious mind. You're actually, like, on this call, let's say you're paying attention to everything that we're looking at, or everything that we're talking about. Your conscious mind is focused on this. But at the same time, your subconscious mind is handling your breathing. It's handling, maybe tuning out any other things that are happening around you. And there's all the digestion and everything that's going on in your body. It's constantly happening. You just don't have to worry about it, so that your conscious mind can be focused on learning what it is that we're learning right here and now. So here's where things get very, 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 very interesting. This is the power of perception. Because what they found is that if the proteins within the cell can perceive a signal, then the proteins will receive it and they will move. But if the proteins cannot receive the signal, then there is no reception, no movement, right? So the ability to receive it dictates whether or not it's received, or well, of course it's received, but whether or not the protein moves. If there's no reception, the protein does nothing. There is no ability for the cell to change at all if it can't receive the signal. The way that they actually found this out, very briefly too, this is very, very fascinating, is that the initial experiment that changed everything for Bruce Lipton was that he was doing experiments with stem cells, with embryonic stem cells, and he found that by applying a different environmental energy to the stem cell, that stem cell could change into a muscle, it can change into fat, or it could change into bone. It could literally become any organ or part, any tissue of the body that it needed to be, based purely on the environment, right? It had nothing to do with the DNA. It had entirely to do with the environment, and it was like the DNA of that cell, or those cells had instructions that we can be anything. We can literally become anything. It entirely depends on what is required of us. So ultimately, though, this led them to conclude that the ability to receive, or to perceive and receive from external sources, is the guiding factor in what governs all behavior, from a cellular level to a body-wide level, both on it, and that's like as a full, complete body of consciousness, as a whole human level body. All of our perceptions and receptions from the environment dictates our behavior, and we have to really understand what this means, because this is really, really profound in the grand scheme of things. This is what lets the ascension process become possible. But the thing is, the only reason that Bruce Lipton went with the biology of belief for his work instead of the biology of perception is because not all the signals that we are receiving, especially the thoughts and feelings we are telling ourselves, are true. Even if we feel or believe that they are true for us, that doesn't mean that they are. 95% of people have perfect DNA. So we went back earlier, we were talking about how people have believed for a very, very long time, that if you had this, your parents had a problem, you have a problem, this is a hereditary thing, you just dealt a bad hand, your DNA just sucks. Well, that's not true. 95% of people have perfect DNA. And to be very, very clear, sometimes people are born with birth defects or other genetic disorders, things like Down syndrome and stuff like this. And this is actually very rare, but it is a result of something gone awry in the genetic code. So there are such things as imperfect DNA. Yes, we have to acknowledge that. However, most people in the world, 95 to 98% of people, have DNA that is completely fine. And almost all issues in life, whether it's allergies, depression, anxiety, ADHD, or even serious diseases, this sort of, well, my family had cancer and I'm going to have cancer and all this, these are all a result of environmental factors. So an example of this is, just because our parents drank in excess or developed cancer doesn't mean that we have to. But if we are receiving signals like thoughts and feelings from ourselves and others consistently, and that's what we're receiving and programming our minds to receive and our body of consciousness to receive, then this causes the proteins to react in that way. It actually causes the DNA to say, oh, you believe you have depression? Great. Well, I'm not going to give you the happiness things. We'll give you the depression ones. Here you go. You get the genetic, they actually found that people who are more happy in life have certain genes in their DNA more activated than others. And people who are more depressed generally tend to have these genes activated, or at least these ones are turned off. But turned off and turned on doesn't mean that you can't turn off and turn on DNA on command. It just means that you've been telling your body to turn that off. Or if you're more happy, you're telling your body to turn that on. And doing that, having that programming, having that mindset completely is the determining factor in what causes it, in what causes that to take place, those changes inside of the proteins in the DNA. So the beautiful revelation here is that we have significantly more agency and authority over our lives than we've ever realized before. And now, before I go to the next slide, I want to pass it to Ben and maybe even Chris. If you guys have anything to jump in here with, we'd love to hear from you, because this is really where it starts to get into that sort of practical, revelation.
I would just say, my personal reflection on this when I first came across this work was, and still is, that this science, this study is like the most profound thing happening relative to what we're calling in this workshop, the science of ascension. So as, personally for me, I saw this really connecting in deeply with quantum theory and quantum mechanics, and at least from an armchair point of view, understanding the power of perception and the observation, seeing how this very practically gave my left brain evidence for the power of prayer and the power of meditation in a totally different way in terms of changing the environment. Of course, law of attraction. And for me, my own personal story is, I was a witness to a psychic surgery one time through ultrasound. And that was like life-changing for me in kind of this evidence-based way. And that happened far before I came across this work. And this work very much helped me in many ways contextualize that experience. And then, of course, like ancient mystical traditions and ancient mystical teachings. So more so as I'm sitting here listening, Jordan, it's just like really recognizing like this is a game changer for the way that we can collectively choose to create the environment that we're in. And this sort of work gives me a lot of hope for very practically seeing how people can begin to feel more empowered. This is the type of thing that is either, or perhaps bothly going to make us feel very confronted, like scientific evidence that, we create our reality in this sort of way, very confronting, and at the same time, very empowering. And so I think it takes us, those that are kind of diving in from a spiritual lens, a soul lens, a lot of concentration to really integrate this into our lives. And more so what I personally am reflecting on is how important that is that I do that. And I continue to be on that journey of doing that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Chris, or even Selena, do you guys have anything you want to jump in with too?
I mean, there's just one last like a fact that one of the big reasons, another reason why he called it the power of belief rather than perception is we have to take into account, well, to quote Carl Jung, the collective unconscious. So you have your own unconscious that is arguably influencing your body. But if you think of, again, this sort of goes back to what Ben was saying within sort of bringing in quantum theory and that kind of thing, all energy and matter in the universe is essentially waves, which by definition means that we are also waves interacting with our environment, and everything on our environment is waves interacting with us. But that also means that everyone else and every other person that you interact with is also sending out a wave of vibration that is interacting with your vibration. So if we, branch out and look at it collectively, take aging. Aging is a big sort of factor in any of these types of works, because there is sort of a overlying belief that the only reason we age as people is because as a society, age is programmed into us. the only reason that we think we grow older is because every single day we see people who are older. We see old people, we see young people. So we think that the passage of time equates with getting older. But actually, in this kind of work, it's implying that actually the cells themselves don't get older. It's just your perception and your belief that the passage of time is you getting older. But at the same time, it's not just you influencing your cells. And this sort of goes back to the whole idea of, you know, interacting with other people's energy fields, the auras, that kind of stuff. In that when you interact with somebody, their belief about their reality can sometimes also affect you. So if other people are believing that everybody is aging and that all of our society is collectively an aging thing, that also arguably could make you age, if that makes sense, until you sort of use your consciousness to change your underlying beliefs. But it's just, you know, another word of caution to kind of be very aware of the people in your life, you know, your circle and who you surround yourself with, because they are the people who are quite literally, when we say, you know, a very common thing in any spiritual circle is that a person can affect your vibration, or, you know, people have good vibes or bad vibes. With this kind of work, that is a very real thing. And, you know, it really implies that you have to be very careful and, you know, selective about who you allow in to influence you in your life, and in extent how you impact and how your thoughts and feelings and everything like that impact the world around you and other people. So that's just something else to think about. But yeah.
Awesome. You know, it's so interesting too that you brought that up, because if you think about it, like when you were a kid, or at least I can say for myself, but like, you know, everyone reflect on this in your own lives, right? Like, did you ever have an experience where you kind of just adopted a belief because your friend believed that, you know, like your friend thought it was cool to shoot fireworks on a or to do, you know, like, I don't even know what I would be saying, like, as far as an actual example, but in this moment, but I can definitely feel like if I wanted some friends to like me and they were behaving a certain way, I would change my behavior to like that thing that they did, even if I might not have naturally liked it on my own, but I wanted them to like me. Like, actually, one example that's just coming to me now is like heavy metal. When I was in high school, I had a friend whose name was also Jordan, but he was super into like heavy metal and that kind of stuff, and wasn't exactly my thing, but he was very into it and I wanted him to like me. And so I just adopted that belief and I started listening to heavy metal and I kind of got into it. And then I started to like it. But then after our friendship kind of dissolved, not like that anything bad happened, just over time we drifted apart. And I just stopped listening to that kind of music because it was a relationship that I had to the music was based on my relationship with that friend, you know? So this is a thing that we have to look at, of like, how many beliefs did we pick up from our family, from our friends, from people in our lives, from the internet, you know? Like, so you see a meme that makes you laugh, even if it's like, oh, that's bad. Like, you know, we've all seen memes like that are really funny, but it's like, that shouldn't exist, you know? Cannot unsee, but it's really funny. And then from that experience of it, kind of like programs a little bit of those thoughts into your subconscious. So I know I brought up Selena, I brought up you a few times. I wanted to invite you to share if you had anything to, and then we'll go on to the next slide. But I didn't want to like jump over you just in case you had anything you want to jump in with.
No, I mean, I think it kind of what Chris, you said about really paying attention and being cautious. And then what Ben had said about this season really being about being aware and starting to create that sacred space within you. So just, that's what this season is about, is looking at how we're feeling and what's in our life and our belief system. That's what we're looking at right now, because we are getting our belief system from our subconscious mind and the world around us. So our environment is very, very important, and what is surrounding us is really important. So I just want to urge all of you to continue looking at your energy and how you're feeling and your emotions, and really being aware of your belief system and seeing how it's affecting your reality.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. So I'm really happy that you brought this up too. And actually, I think Chris, Ben, and Selena all mentioned this, which was the subconscious. This is where we're going next. What even is the subconscious? This is very, very important for this material, actually, because you've probably heard that, this idea of we only use 10% of our brains, that's like this pervading myth. And the actual science of that, like the using 10% of our brains, isn't exactly true. However, there is an underlying truth that never really gets talked about, especially in the scientific circles. You'll hear Neil deGrasse Tyson say this a lot. He's like, oh, that 10% brain thing, that's only a myth. Like, you're going to talk about the other side of the No, you're not? Okay, moving on. So the truth is that our conscious mind, what we're actually consciously aware of in any particular moment, usually only counts for between 1 and 10% of our experience of life. So it's not that we're only using 10% of our brain, but we're only conscious of 1 to 10% of what we're actively experiencing any particular moment. Sometimes it's 1 to 5% for the average level of human consciousness. For people who don't practice mindfulness and meditation and whatnot, for those who are very, very, like one-dimensional in their thinking, it's probably down in that 1% area, and we can see this happening in a lot of people who are very either fear-based or stuck in the pre-existing programs of the world. They're not even really aware of the grand scope of information that's available to them. And therefore, most of their lives are happening subconsciously or unconsciously. But we have to understand also that the subconscious mind is not really like a full waking consciousness, not the way that we think of our active consciousness, though, because it's more like a tape recorder of everything you've ever believed to be true, affirming it to yourself. Now, this is the example that Bruce gives because I think it makes it very easy for us to just comprehend it. But it's like when you know how to do something, your subconscious mind just takes over. So something like walking, when you're, a 1-year-old or however many months you have to be old to learn how to walk, as you're learning that process, it's taking your full conscious mind to learn it. You have to be focused. Left foot, okay, right foot, okay, left foot, oh, I fell. Okay, hold on, let's stand up again, right? Like, that's what you're focused on. So programming your mind, it takes full consciousness often to be able to learn a new skill. But once you know how to do it, look, I think it's probably fair to say that almost everyone on this call can walk around without having to think what leg is actively in front of the other in any particular moment. You just do it. So that's very, very valuable. It's, that's something that we have to, we shouldn't be like, oh, well, the subconscious mind, we should just, eradicate it and make everything conscious. Well, not necessarily, because it's very important to be able to put things into the background to just handle whatever it's doing so that, frees up your mind to be able to explore other things. Another example here is like driving a car and having a conversation. Your body naturally takes over and handles the driving for you. Once you've learned how to drive and you're a good driver, you can have a conversation with someone else in the car or listen to an audiobook while you're driving, and you can just like zone into that with your conscious mind because your body's just got the driving experience handled. Like, you're good. You don't have to really worry about it. And this is, again, very, very valuable. I can say as a personal example as well as when I was growing up, I spent a lot of time animating and learning how to make videos and learning how to do really good animations. But once I felt very confident in my ability to make animations, I could offload that into the subconscious, and I could be listening to something else while I was drawing, while I was working on a video and stuff like that. And this is very critical as well because one of our animators is here on this call. and there has to be a balance between making sure that you learn the skill fully before offloading it into the subconscious. So when you're starting learning to drive, learning to animate, learning to do one of these skills, it's really good to put your full focus into this and really practice making that thing look good or learning how to do it well. But once you're proficient at it, then you can shift that into your subconscious. And through mindfulness, through meditation practice, you can bring more of your subconsciousness into conscious awareness as well. So there is sort of a balance here. I'm not also saying like, well, let's just leave it at that 5% line or whatever of, what you're actively conscious of in any particular moment, I think through meditation and other spiritual practice, you can expand the range of your consciousness. You can still utilize your subconsciousness, but that you can utilize your full conscious awareness to become more aware of what's going on in your life. And a really good example of this, I think, is that movie Limitless. If you've seen the movie with Rocket from Guardians of the Galaxy, I forget his name in this moment. But he plays the character of this guy who, has kind of like a terrible, dull life, and he takes this pill called NZT, and this is basically what's happening, is that he is taking his full consciousness and expanding it to like 100% of his subconscious. So he's like fully aware of his past, present, future, and all of, future as far as planning goes, but like all of the information he's ever seen that his subconscious picked up, he was suddenly aware of it in like a complete capacity, and he was able to string all of these thoughts together into generating essentially a form of wisdom. And this is something that we can each do through mindfulness and through meditation practice. But there's a very key important thing here on how to do this, which is through the awareness of what fear and love does to the cells in the body. See, what Bruce Lipton and his team discovered was that fear demonstrates a significant change in the cell's behavior that actually limits it from receiving all of the signals that it possibly could. Fear actually closes the protein's ability to receive. And in doing so, shifts, like it actually changes the paradigm. It limits it narrows your focus. If through meditation and love, you can expand your consciousness to 10, 15, 20%, and so on, expanding the sense of everything that you're aware of in the universe and your life and these different aspects of your life and how you're feeling in any particular moment, fear goes and narrows it down to this very fine, very, very limited, narrow focus. And thus all that you can receive is, just this little bit. We have to be aware, also be very aware of considering the subconsciousness. What are you afraid of is very important, because, the initial thought when you think fear, you're like, okay, well, if I'm running from a bear, yes, I have to, I go into narrow focus mode, and I'm going to limit my, this is what I'm trying to do, is just survive and run away. Absolutely. But what about, as it relates to our Spiritual Money Mastery course, what about if you're afraid of not being able to make your rent? What if you're afraid of ruining your relationship? What if in a partnership sense, what if you're afraid of losing your job? Or what if you're afraid of, insert kind of more of a standard life fear here? In some ways you could be very open, but in other ways you could be having these subconscious fears that are programmed into you, that you're telling yourself, affirming to yourself, kind of without even knowing, being like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to afford this. I don't know if I'm going to be able to pay my rent, or you'll be able to make, make enough ends meet. And the money is a really good example, because it drops you down to the root chakra really quickly. And you might even remember, you can see a very practical example of this in I think it was our second chakras episode, where there's a patch machine, the diagram sort of thing that Patchman shows, where it's look, the root chakra has a single line of awareness, and then the sacral chakra has sort of a slightly larger span of awareness. And as you move up the chakras, that awareness expands and expands and becomes more encompassing and more encompassing, until you're at the crown chakra, where it's all encompassing. And this is something that we have to be aware of within ourselves, of really identifying what subconscious programs are actively playing out in any particular moment, or constantly what we're affirming to ourselves based on our beliefs about ourselves. I can say for myself, there was a time when I was in junior high and high school. I remember, especially in junior high, I was bullied a lot, and I took on a lot of those beliefs. And I would remember, in the morning or in the evening, I'd be, brushing my teeth or whatever before bed or after waking up. And I'd be looking at myself in the mirror. And I literally remember thinking to myself, God, you are so ugly. And that was a common thought in my brain. I would believe that about myself, trying to, maybe subconsciously trying to find some redeeming value in the look of my face, but not being satisfied with myself. And that was the overwhelming emotional feeling that I had. And I think the result of that was like I had tons of acne, I had very low self-esteem, and I took very poor care of myself. I didn't even have the capacity to think of self-care and self-love. I was just living in this kind of like weird depression where like I could offload that when I was animating because I didn't worry about, I was hiding behind my cartoons, but I was being creative. So I had a creative outlet. But otherwise, you know, when I was at school, when I was not animating, when I was among people, those were the programs that I was running. But of course, as we're exploring here on this very slide, love helps the cells to open to a greater capacity. They help you to receive and perceive more. It helps you to understand more, and becomes easier by opening to love. And just that simple thing, like taking a moment to just feel love, feel gratitude in any particular moment, it becomes easier to reprogram your subconscious and change your own behavioral patterns. So said in a very simple sense, fear contributes to cellular breakdown, where love contributes to cellular health. So this is very, very interesting in the creation of a child, in the growing and the nurturing of a child. Between the age of conception and about 9 years old is where it caps out. But like the 6 ages, like conception to 6, is really this key phase here. A child is, and then like 6 to 9 is the sort of the transition into more of where average levels of thought are. But a child develops in this place of heightened receptivity. They're not even cognitively aware to think like we are. They're just established. It's like a period of just building mental patterns. Their subconscious is being programmed. And an example of this is like, this was so profound to me. I was like, oh my God, I wish my parents knew this. I wish my mom knew this when I was a kid, because I could be speaking Spanish and Japanese right now. But between the ages, like when you're born to like 6, 7, 8 or so, a child can learn up to 3 languages independently just by listening to them being spoken. This is insane. Like, and the child could easily distinguish, this is English, this is Spanish, this is Japanese, this is whatever language it is that they're listening to. They can identify the different dialects, the different tones, the different things. They're just receiving it. They become like a sponge. And it's so easy for them to learn anything. So imagine, you know, it's like when a child is growing up in our average world, and the kid's being told no all the time. No, you can't have this. No, you can't do that. No, you can't. Because a kid is actually told no so many times on a daily basis on our average, you know, life. It's like this is the program that they're that they're predisposed to, is just thinking limits. No, you can't. You won't. You know, like this is the kind of thinking the child is programmed with, that it will affect them their entire lives. And after the age of 7, 8, 9, after 9 or so, learning languages, changing the programs becomes significantly more difficult. And there's even a thing of like the in Judaism, I just heard this from Bruce Lipton yesterday, actually, supposedly in Judaism, that for thousands of years, they would actually sort of brag about this. They'd say, give us the child in the first 6 years of their lives, and the church owns them for the rest of their lives. Because that's all that it takes, is programming a kid with those beliefs for those first 6 years of their lives, especially. They become a sponge. They take in all of it. They believe it. It is affirmed to them in their lives in such a deep way that changing those programs becomes very, very difficult. And this isn't something that is anything new. Again, like the Jewish priests and everything, they bragged about it. They were like, yeah, this is how we do things. So this is not anything new. And now I'll pass it over to you, Ben, because I think you have probably some really valuable things to add here.
Well, I think what I wanted to share wasn't so much on parenting advice or anything like that, because I have the understanding that most people here aren't parents, but it was more so like the insight within myself and being relatively, at least attempting to be aware of my actions and how they affect my kids. I have a 5-year-old girl and a 2-year-old boy. In and of itself is a practice. And as it relates to this, what I was reflecting on is the kind of correlation between this young sub 9-year-old child being just open and in a place of like full receptivity, no real filters in any meaningful way in terms of like being programmed. And I don't mean that as a negative thing. I mean that like it literally is just factual. It's neutral. Programming happens, whether it's, you know, something we consider positive or negative. That's up to us. But it was this realization that I'll tell through kind of the story here, which is, you know, part of my, you know, a conscious parent's goal is to help cultivate or help maintain or instill, you know, whatever we want to call as like morals, like how to make decisions, right? It's like one of the baseline things we're trying to do. And so when my kids, I know I have this understanding, my kids are just open. If I take action, that's going to be received much more directly than words. So my embodiment of something that I want to explain or teach or share with my kids is going to be far more impactful than me sitting down and like reading them a story and then talking about the moral of the story or talking with them in general. It's going to be far, far, far more impactful. So, you know, in fact, it can be, you know, kind of confusing. And I've seen this as a reflection from my kids and myself. If I, you know, sit down and read my 5-year-old a Norse mythological story, which we're kind of on those right now, and I'm pulling out the themes and it's, you know, it's like fun and we talk about it and we read like 6 pages, then we talk about it, that sort of thing. And if we were to come to like a believing in yourself theme, which is obviously like very common, and I read a story and we talk about believing in yourself, but I'm not fully believing in myself and my day to day. And that could be, you know, exampled by, you know, just not acting on my inspiration. That would be, you know, another way of saying I'm not believing in myself. I'm more so like looking at the fear within myself and acting upon the fear. That inaction is going to communicate, you know, 100x on the little story that I read and try to explain it to them with words. And some of my insight is that it should be obvious, or at least that's logical to them, that a child is going to just perceive action, the visual stimulus of this world and being around me and my energy. He or she, my kids are going to know when I'm like fully doing it and when they're not. And there's no sort of BS I'm going to be able to spend to them to explain, you know, the stuff I'm working through. They don't know what that's about. Right. So this is the insight that I wanted to share is this is our subconscious. Like this open, receptive, no filter idea that I have as my child, we can think about that as our subconscious. There's no real filter there. It just receives and it does. And I know this is getting into kind of the strategies, which we're going to get to later, but the insight is that no matter how many affirmations I do, no matter how much writing I do or reading I do, ultimately what's going to communicate to my subconscious that which I want to be or that which I want to create is going to be my embodiment, is the just doingness of what I do. And as a parent, I just have that, you know, we have that awesome reflection in our kids to see that. It just doesn't click. And it's the same within ourselves. It really just doesn't click unless we're taking the steps to do what it is we say we're going to do. So anyway, that was that's my reflection on parenting in terms of how that's applicable to all of us and how we're nurturing that open subconscious. We call it the subconscious within ourselves.
Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you, Ben. You know, it's interesting too. You brought up a couple things here for me. One of them was, well, just when you said that, you know, bringing in and being with the just doingness, I wanted to reference that King of Discs energy again too, right? Because it's like if the thoughts and the feelings are in alignment, then they become a vessel for spirit to just shine through like a prism. Spirit just like comes into the body and becomes action effortlessly without all of the, oh, but what if I can't? What if I, you know, that not believing in yourself can that belief itself of I don't believe in myself can take over and can muddy the energy as spirit is trying to shine through the body. And the other thing, this is just a theory that I've had ever since I heard this, just, you know, when I was doing this research, was but again, like, I'll express, I haven't heard this anywhere. This was just what came to me naturally, was perhaps the reason why a child is so heightened and receptive in this moment, or when they're born, is because when they first begin, they are nearly 100% water. And when they're born, what is it? A baby is like 95% water or something like that. And it's only as you're growing, as you develop, and by the age of 9, 10, and then through teenage years and everything like that, you slowly go from 95% water down to the average is like 78 or 75 or somewhere in that range. I forget the specifics. But water is that like receptive element. And, when we think of how information and emotions and everything is stored in water, and sort of that water science that we've looked at before, it's kind of like, perhaps that's like, the water is just naturally in the body, is just receiving and absorbing everything and building these patterns as the body is growing, and slowly the water level is going down. And so I was thinking too, like, they often say that it's very healthy. It's a good idea to drink 3 liters of water every day. And that might be a really good practice that each of us could also bring in if we want to become more receptive, if we want to help ourselves reprogram our energy. Making a conscious note to drink at least 3 liters of water a day would assist in the reprogramming of our consciousness and our subconscious, because we'd be opening ourselves to receiving more and hydrating our bodies to increase the natural water levels. And I used to wonder, I was like, if I drank enough water, could I get back to that like 95%? But I'm not sure that it's right to. But I also know that we don't drink enough water as a species on our daily lives on average, and that in and of itself is a problem, because then we become dehydrated, and it becomes even harder to change around the programs, because you just imagine, you've got your fire element and your earth element and your air element, but the water is lacking. And so our intuitive, our emotional capacity comes down or lowers. And in doing so, our bodies, it just naturally becomes more difficult to take in and absorb and receive more information, more knowledge, and especially apply it, because the water is that, like it carries, it's like the blood in your body. It's what carries the nourishing information to all of the cells. So with that, at last, we come to, how does this relate to the science of ascension? So this is the most exciting truth of all. And this is where we kind of have this bridge now, all of this thing to how does it relate with ascension? And it's very interesting, because I'd love to actually talk with Bruce Lipton about this personally, because even he has expressed, he's like, well, human evolution isn't going to evolve, but our technology will, and that's how we're going to evolve, is just through technology. And I'm like, and you believe that? And this is the science that we're showing, is like, your beliefs are governing what is possible for you. So what we do understand, and what he's shared, is that the nature of reality is change. We're in a constant state of flux all the time, and the energy waves that are moving through and around all of us are vital, because our own vibrational frequency has the power to change us at an atomic level. So we have to understand, though, the first step in the ascension process, like, this is a pathway. This isn't like, I believe that I can levitate, and then you go and like jump off of like a roof and then you hurt yourself. So we have to be very, very clear that, we're not saying that you instantly, decide that you believe something with the conscious mind, and that as if you're reprogramming all the subconscious. You have to deal with all of this karma, the baggage, the dead weight, the old beliefs, the signals that we've held on to, all of this stuff. This is the first step. And it's so rooted in our subconscious as well as our collective unconscious, as Chris was describing before, that we as a species have these limiting beliefs that are pervading the consciousness field. And we have to begin to address these individually and collectively. There are so many ideas that are within us that we don't even know are governing such a big part of our lives. And what's so amazing about this is that it really relates with our last wisdom moon. One of the things we talked about in our exploration of the mysteries of philosophy was the work of Socrates. The pervading beliefs of the time when Socrates was around was they didn't like Socrates. They actually condemned him, because he was basically telling everybody, you should think for yourself. And also, we're overconfident in our beliefs. And that is a theme that is still present today. People believe what they believe to be true so much, but the only way to really overcome the limitations of our belief is to acknowledge that we don't know anything. And this is one of the greatest things that scientists today can do, is by saying, you know what? We don't have all the answers. And we have to each be able to say that for ourselves. We have to acknowledge fully, we know nothing in the grand scheme of things, and we have to be open to learning. And even as far as ascension goes, if we think that we know what ascension is supposed to look like, that in and of itself is a limitation upon a much greater picture. Like ascension, all of the stories that we have available, we have to be able to play this card as saying all of those stories of Jesus and the ascended masters and Thoth might just be stories. You know, it's really amazing and fun to think and believe of, you know, like what if this is how, you know, we can learn to levitate and everything like that. Maybe ascension looks different. Maybe ascension actually looks like, well, our physical bodies don't levitate, but our consciousness can move in and out. It's like being on perpetual DMT on command. You can just like activate it within your mind. But of course, the beliefs, as we're seeing, are the things that are shaping those results. So this comes down to that ultimate question that we asked at the beginning. If consciousness is the thing that steers reality, then ideally, and consciousness is infinite and limitless, then any one of those possibilities and outcomes should be possible. And my speculation, at least what I'm kind of choosing to believe until I expand, you know, I guess my sense of knowing continues to expand because I'm always trying to learn and grow. So, you know, I don't want to say that my beliefs are fixed, but what I like to believe, or what I'm exploring at the moment within me, is that if we choose to, we can essentially command our bodies through our consciousness at an atomic and a subatomic and quantum level to learn to control the forces that govern the entire physical universe. Now, let's be very clear. We don't really have any evidence to suggest that any physical being so far that we can practically see with our eyes can do this. You know, like birds learned how to fly, but they flap their wings and have like hollow bones and are very, very light. You know, like for a person to be able to fly, we'd have to actually at a quantum and subatomic level be able to release the force of gravity around our body, or be able to tap into the force of gravity and change it around our bodies. That is something that, you know, no physicist will say that is possible, of course, and if believing it so makes it so, and that sort of a thing. But like, you know, to just say, oh, I can do this, and then try is, you know, it's foolish. So the thing is that we have to learn about the path and the process and put ourselves on the path with a very simple belief that we can affirm to ourselves that also doesn't make us so that we start doing, you know, really dumb stuff. And what that could look like is very simply affirming to yourself and saying, I am on the path of ascension, and I'm learning what that is, right? Let that be an affirmation. If that resonates with you, that's something that you can affirm for yourself, is I am on the path of ascension, and opening to receive, open to, you know, we've called in here into this space the ascended masters. We've called in Jesus. We've called in Thoth. We've called in Buddha and all of these magnificent beings in history. And we say, look, we don't know, but will you help us learn? You know, and then the information comes naturally. I think that this is even part of why this is the workshop. This is the workshop that came about this week, this day on this eclipse here, was because this was the question that I've been asking. And all of these different researches and information and studies are just naturally flowing through. And Chris, you know, we can probably talk about this quite a bit, of like the depth of the conversations that we've had over the past month or so has really been about like, well, is it, you know, it's like, there's no evidence in physics to suggest that any of this is possible, but if it was, and, you know, like, how could we do this? Chris, do you have anything to add to the science of ascension and how this all fits together?
Not so much specifically to ascension, but I mean, one of the other things that I remember Bruce did the example of, or he like said as an example, with regard to fear as well, and sort of how that impacts ascension, is using the idea of a swimming baby. So when a baby is first born, it instinctively knows how to swim. So if you have if parents from mother has a water birth, the baby instinctively knows how to stay afloat so it can swim up and breathe. It's only afterwards. So then you might ask, okay, well, if a baby knows instinctively how to swim, then why do we have children that can't swim? Or why do we have to teach children to swim? Well, in large part, it's because afterwards, weeks or months following the birth, whenever the parents see a baby around or anywhere near water, their first instinct is, oh my God, it's going to fall in, and they get really scared, right? And in this sort of line of thinking, the parents are imposing that fear on the baby, and that sort of fear is being produced in the consciousness field, which then it gets imposed to the baby, which affects the baby's cells and everything, and affects its mindset and its perception, which then makes the baby itself unconsciously believe it can't swim. So then by the time it gets to walking, and by the time you put it into a bit of water, it can't swim, because for so long the parents have been imposing that kind of fear and that kind of belief that to the baby water is bad and water is equated with fear. So if we were to apply this to ascension, again, kind of ascension, it's one of those things it means different things to different people, but in our kind of society, it's kind of not frowned upon, but there is a kind of energy where it goes against the norm. And because it goes against the norm, it's kind of sometimes seen as something to fear. But that fear isn't our own fear. It's something that's the way society is structured. It's what everyone else is kind of imposing on us. So it's just, we need to be conscious of really what fears are our own and which fears are imposed on us. And actually speaking to that, which I've just remembered this, there is a meditation in the Emerald Tablets that Thoth talks about that is exactly for that purpose. And it's like the whole ring meditation, where you visualize yourself surrounded by glowing rings, and you can kind of intuitively feel whether the fear is coming from your own heart or whether it's a product of your environment, and in which case you can discard it. So that's something, understanding fear and where it comes from, that's something you can look into if you read the Emerald Tablets. But again, all of this, it's one of those things, everything seems like loads of little things are together, but then when you take a step back and look at it from like a top-down approach or from a conscious perspective, you'd see that all the little things join together and form one huge picture. So a lot of these things might seem, different, but trust me, they are all completely interconnected. It's a really amazing field that we're really getting into.
Yeah.
So
beautiful. Thank you so much. Well, I just, I feel compelled to share too, before we go to the next slide, because I have a very special, exciting story and something to share. But before we get there, I really like, Chris, that you said ascension is something that means something different to everyone. And that's I think where I'm also coming from when I say, we don't know, because it can mean a lot of different things. And when like the term ascension itself really came from Christianity. It came from the story of Jesus. It might have been passed on, like the concept, because Jesus' ascension mirrored many other ascensions before that, but it might have had a different word for it, in translations and changing of times and everything. But the concept was, Jesus' ascension, moving to his higher, it was like the core idea being ascending, moving up into something greater, into something higher. And so maybe we can even look at ascension in the sense of there's many, many layers. And like one day, this is how I'm at least approaching it for myself, is like one day I'd love to see it, like explore that. And like, maybe through plant medicine, maybe through meditation, all these different practices of reaching that level where we can change ourselves to that point of, like learning to levitate. It's because of the plant medicine experiences that became this, there was these visions of that being possible, and ultimately leading me to ask these questions a lot and be thinking about it a lot. And I think that that's necessary for it to even become possible. Because if nobody ever thinks about it, then it's very unlikely that we'll get there, unless a child is born who's just like, oh yeah, I can fly. And then the world takes notice, which also might happen. Who knows? But that whole thing of like ascension, if the whole idea there, though, is like many layers of it and it's just moving up, then let's look at that in sort of a stair step for ourselves and say, what is the moving up, the next step, like maybe the, you know, flying and this and that, bending the elements, so cool. But maybe that's, you know, that's like at the top of the staircase, but we're at the bottom of the staircase right now. What's the next step? And that might be like, we have to go through the chakras a little bit, right? We have to be like, okay, well, first I need my root chakra stable. I need to have like a solid financial base so that I don't have to worry about survival and I can explore some higher frequencies. I want to manifest a really healthy relationship with myself, or maybe with a partner, whatever it is that my heart's calling for, in order to not have to feel like that's a part of my life that's missing, or that, you know, or at least, you know, within yourself, having a really stable and solid sacral chakra and whatnot to move up and into these other levels. So we have to look at where we are personally and say, what is the next step in my personal ascension? What is the next step for me to embody, to create a harmony with, right? And we begin working with ourselves at that level to make life better. And so that's how we have this very practical moving upwards energy, instead of feeling like, I mean, this actually came from, I think we discussed this inside of Spiritual Money Mastery a little bit, but as far as like law of attraction goes, you know, you when you make a vision board, if you make a vision board and you say, all right, I want to make like $100 billion next year, like you're setting yourself up for so much disappointment, because that's such a big leap energetically that the universe goes, I mean, really? You know, it's very difficult to make that jump without, I mean, because you have to put in the effort to be able to get there. And that's a lot of energy to channel very, very quickly. It's, most people won't even, it takes some time. Even with, look at, you know, Jeff Bezos or whatever, you know, the richest guy in the world with Amazon, the amount of time that it took for him to get to where he is now didn't just happen instantly. There was a lot, many years of struggle and focus and, you know, really grinding to get to the point where he built this, you know, giant kind of empire for himself. And I, you know, not trying to, just saying like that's an example of what it can look like financially, but I don't think all of us are really on that path of doing what he did. But yeah, so the whole point there ultimately though being like, you know, make your inner vision board, maybe even a real vision board, right? Set goals for yourself that are actually attainable, that you believe that you can attain. Because if it's in the realm of possibility, and if it's something that you believe you can do, it becomes far more likely that it can actually happen. And one final thing before we move on to the next slide too, is that Bruce Lipton shared this one story of like, there's this reported case all over the world of women who suddenly can learn how to lift cars instantaneously the moment that their baby is trapped inside. When they, you know, if there's a car accident or something like that and they need to get their baby, there's this like amazing experience where women can just like in that moment, they just know they not only that they can, but they have to, and they do, like lift a car or move it or push it in some way in order to save their child. And it's this like root level instinctive powerful force within the you know, the strength of the mother coming through and just like channeling this like God force power to lift a car or move it because the situation demands it. But if you ask any average person, just walk up to them, anyone on this call, hi, can you lift a car? Most people will be like, no, of course not. But like in one of those situations, you know, all the adrenaline activates, the body activates, everything just like activates. Suddenly, you know, you can do it and you do it. And there's even other stories like this where, you know, often Christian fundamentalists and other religious fundamentalists will be like, I am blessed by God, I will not be hurt. And they'll like drink poison and it'll have no effect because they're believing so fully that God's got them handled. And like, that's another example of just how potent beliefs can shape and shift your life and your abilities actively in this moment. But you have to acknowledge too, like what the circumstance was, right? In those cases, they were like channeling this sort of, you know, God force moment of being so in alignment with, you know, their beliefs that they could cultivate the strength and the whole body to not have any effect from the poison or to lift a car and whatnot. But it's those are these moments in time that are not like, those are in between other strands of like being a normal person. So we have to be aware of that like there's waves as well of tapping into ourself and then also being a part of the world and kind of riding that wave. We have to learn to ride those waves properly and to know, and I guess to really own and embody that light within us that believes whatever it is that we're believing about ourselves. That's why it takes some time, even in the shifting of your wealth vibration, as the spiritual money mastery goes. And hey, we are in Capricorn right now, which is also very related with wealth and stuff. It's like it takes some time to reprogram the beliefs, the subconscious that says, I'm broke and I'm struggling with money, to replace that with I'm living in abundance. It takes some time to program that, but it can be reprogrammed. And it just takes that opening and surrendering to a new belief and letting the old programs be overwritten. So I have a really fun story now. This is really, really, really exciting. We're going to get more into now the actual ascension thing. I had an ayahuasca experience once. This was actually the one from the Rhythmia movie, that where Thoth on the third night gave me this Merkaba. It was a new Merkaba. And I had actually been struggling with the Drunvalo Merkaba for a little while because I would practice it and it would feel good. But whenever I would take a plant medicine, I would feel my body becoming very numb for a little bit, as if the plant medicine was actually having to break up something that was stuck within me, as if the old Merkaba was no longer in alignment with my highest spiritual capacity. It was like there was something greater waiting for me, and I didn't, I just had to kind of stop using that Merkaba and start using this one. So this activated within me over the ceremony, and this is what it looked like. And it had a three-stranded DNA or a triple helix DNA spiraling from my feet to the top of my head. And it also had these like kind of particle effects that were, it was literally, because I do particle effects in my animation stuff. So it was like these particles that were exploding from my feet and sort of spiraling up with the DNA up all around my body. And then the whole thing was surrounded by like an octahedron. And the whole thing was, it was all moving, it was all flowing, and it was a very powerful, potent experience. But this is the thing, it was a three-stranded DNA. And so this really got me thinking about this as we were exploring, as I was learning Bruce Lipton stuff and learning about the biology of belief. It was like, wow, like the DNA is the blueprint for what the proteins are capable of doing. So is it possible to, through meditation, breathwork, plant medicine, and other spiritual experiences, to ask or invoke our DNA to evolve, to actually add a strand to our DNA in some capacity? And speaking to the evolution of DNA, like if the DNA could evolve, then the blueprints it could provide the cell with would also evolve. And thus the abilities of the proteins could evolve, and then the range of signals we could receive could evolve. Like there are creatures on this earth who can see the entire light spectrum, infrared and X-ray vision, and all of these different, like there's a multicolored shrimp or something. I forget what it was. It's like this beautiful shrimp. If anyone knows the name of it, please share it in the chat here in the Wisdom Moon Discord. It's this really beautiful creature, actually. And I just learned about this fairly recently, but it has this incredible ability to like see everything. Like we see such a small limited band of the light spectrum, right? And what if, like, maybe subconsciously our body is receiving, it's the mantis shrimp. That's right. Ardain just shared this. It's the mantis shrimp. If you want to look this up, it's this crazy looking thing. We were talking about I was talking about with some friends, how come when people take ayahuasca or DMT, they sometimes see these like praying mantis beings over and over and over. Is that all just locked in our subconscious? Or is this actually like another species? And that was like a fun conversation to have, that we're like meeting on these psychedelic journeys. And my friend was like, have you seen the mantis shrimp? And then we were talking about it, and it's this crazy looking thing. But the question is like, what if we can receive, Selena just shared it. It's like, it looks like a rainbow in a body. So beautiful. What if it's possible to expand our DNA and our DNA's capacity to do what could be considered the impossible. Maybe a double helix maybe a double helix DNA limits us to a certain realm of capabilities, even with like all of the DNA activated and all of our DNA turned on to its fullest potential. Maybe we still have limitations, and maybe we actually need to expand the capabilities of what the DNA can do by adding an extra strand, which of course probably wouldn't be done through scientific experiments. It would be done through something like this kind of meditation, or at least that's how it makes sense to me, or at least what I experienced in my plant medicine journey, in the ayahuasca journey, right? Like using the plant medicine for that purpose. So again, not to discredit the double helix, because the sheer volume of capabilities within the double helix itself is a quantity beyond what we currently understand in science. I mean, numerically, like Bruce Lipton was saying, there's some, 50,000 possibilities, some crazy number of possibilities of the way that the DNA, the double helix can actually like provide blueprints for. And that some are turned off, some are turned on, and there's a lot there. Like, I'm not claiming to really fully understand how the double helix itself works. And I don't even know, all I'm sharing mostly is my experience with the triple helix. But here's what I do know is that looking at the model of the DNA helix, it certainly looks like something is missing, doesn't it? Like sometimes DNA is drawn where it's like perfectly symmetrical, but that's not actually how DNA seems to appear. Like we actually seem to have this open space. And I'm going to jump forward for just a second here to show you an example of what like our duplex, and like look at how there's just this perfect spot for it looks like another strand to fit in there. But like, how would that work? Is the third strand supposed to be non-physical? Is it light? Is it, like those are questions that I don't have the answers to. Maybe it's true that our physical body would always have a double strand, and that the third strand is a non-physical or some other kind of DNA helix. I don't know. Or maybe you start by creating it non-physically, internally, and programming yourself in that way. And then maybe the DNA can actually begin to form a third strand physically. These are all questions that I don't necessarily have the answers to, but I feel like the conversation about it is the beginning of where where that conversation starts. So that all said, I know that I'm actually not the only one who's experienced quote unquote affecting my own DNA through plant medicine. This is even in DMT, the spirit molecule, where on these DMT experiences, people would come out and say, yeah, I was going through my DNA and I was changing it, and things like this. It's fairly common to hear these kinds of testimonials after ceremony too. Like if you've ever been to Rhythmia, odds are at least one time at the end of a ceremony, if not more, you'll hear someone talking about their DNA and how they were changing it during ceremony. And again, there's still a great deal to explore here. So let's start to conclude this workshop with what could possibly be the most valuable exploration for right now. And we've been talking about this a lot already, but how can you use this information to transform your life today? And the question is really, how does one change the subconscious programming? How do we change the signals? And when we were first planning this workshop, just late last week, I presented sort of the core idea here to the team. And Selena shared something that was really, really amazing about the emotional guidance system. And so I took her notes and appended them into this workshop. And Selena, I would love to bring you to the stage now to share with us the emotional guidance system and what your wisdom is on this.
Yeah, so like Jordan was saying, he kind of brought forth the basis of what we just went through and our belief systems and how our beliefs affect our lives. And I kind of was hit with this really cool concept, but the emotional guidance system. So to me, the emotions I kind of looked at as a navigation system. So think of it like a GPS. So emotions are our navigation system through life, and they tell us where we are. They tell us how we feel about where we've been, and they tell us how we feel about where we're going. So when you're thinking about the past, when you're thinking about the present, when you're thinking about the future, you have these belief systems in place because of your subconscious. So the subconscious has been trained to believe and receive particular things that trigger these emotions. So that could be maybe your parents or your mom or somebody, like maybe they had trust issues. So you were always told like you can't trust anybody, or I can only rely on myself. That's just an example, but like as you are growing and living your life, you're picking up these belief systems and you're receiving these things that are put into your subconscious, and they will trigger these emotions to arise. So out of date emotions are like this old GPS system. So think of it like you have this outdated GPS system and you're driving down the road and there's a bunch of bumps, or there's a bunch of potholes, or maybe the road's like stops and it's a dead end and it's no longer there. That's because that GPS is outdated. Maybe there's these new pathways, these new roads, and you just don't have the awareness that there are new roads because you're living in this outdated mindset. So there can be this mindset, there can be this shift, there can be these rewiring of your subconscious beliefs. And if you do that work and you update your emotional guidance system or your GPS, you can go down smoother pathways with more ease, and you can up level in every area of your life. So I just wanted to invite all of you to really think about your emotions and your emotional guidance system as a GPS. So when you're feeling a certain type of way, think about, why am I feeling this way? Where are these feelings coming from? And how can I shift it so that I can go down a smooth path of abundance and consciousness and up leveling and, being able to up level every aspect of our life and our DNA. So that was just kind of a really cool concept that I'm really glad I get to share with all of you.
Selena, thank you so much. I'd love to open it up as well and say, Ben, do you have anything that you want to jump in with as well on this?
I would just rehash the first point that I made, and that was the profundity of this for our own personal transformation in appeasing our left brain and allowing ourselves to see the logical path within ourselves to ascension through personal development. And perhaps that's part of it. What I'll share is early this morning, we had somebody go through one of our courses and they asked for a refund. And their explanation of, why they wanted a refund, which is, of course, we'll give it to them. But it was that they had this perception when they joined this particular course that they were really, really interested in the ascension information. And this was the course we did on money. And they're really wanting to know the kind of personal transformation of ascension. And, I took some notes and I responded to them, but it's very much the same point that when we can allow ourselves to, at least from like a new age perspective, ease these expectations and these ideas that we have around ascension and allow them to be logical in some way, or at least partially logical, and allow them to be personal, and more so allow yourself to personally improve in various areas of your life, various things, your physical health, mental health, emotional health, then, this sort of epigenetics conversation becomes just as important as anything I have ever personally come across with regard to, for lack of a better word, appeasing and convincing myself, appeasing my left brain, my logic, and really convincing myself that I am on personally, or we all are on this path towards ascension. It practicalizes it in a way that it rings very true to me. So, that's what I would have to share, is that I see this topic, and again, we're using epigenetics as, a coined term by Bruce, and certainly over the next decade, there'll be dozens and dozens of other researchers who will be able to advance this science philosophically and, scientifically in that sense. And we may find different words for it, but right now, this little moniker of epigenetics for me is like, it's really up there in terms of application to our own personal development.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you, Ben. A couple of things I wanted to just address from the Discord chat really quickly as well is, one, this was sort of just an interesting thing I wanted to share and bring up. Rachel had asked, she said that she was going to do an ayahuasca ceremony in the near future, and that, she has 3 superpower wishes: to fly, invisibility, and to speak and understand every language. Could I make this my intention from Friday? And this is something I responded inside of Discord, but I wanted to speak to this here as well, as far as the conversation of this goes. What I would expect, because I've seen this happen before as well, is you can absolutely go in with that intention, and the medicine will acknowledge it. But what often happens, especially when we have intentions like this, ayahuasca is very wise. She's a very profound spirit, and she will probably go, okay, that's great, but in order to get there, we have to do this work first. So she'll clear you out or help you to find clearing and healing in order of priority. So as far as, getting to the point of like learning to fly and turn invisible and all these things, the topmost priority is not going to be that. It's going to be maybe anything. I mean, there's a lot of other stuff in the way. Like I went in with the expectation or the asking of ascension one time, and the medicine actually helped me heal arrogance, because it was like, who the hell do you think you are? Which was beautiful. It was very important for me to humble myself in terms of my expectations, So I just wanted to share that, like, again, you can absolutely set these intentions for yourself, but it's also good to be grounded and to be practical. And then we're going on what Ben would just said as well. I also wanted to share, as far as epigenetics goes, right? Receiving from the environment, we do have to be, mindful of our emotional environment and our mental environment, which is what we've been talking about a lot, our inner GPS. But I think it's very, very critical that we also acknowledge our environment in terms of, like, are you living inside of a city where people are really stressed out all the time? Are you living in like an apartment building where, your neighbors are always playing loud, grungy music or something? Or are you putting food into your body that is less than the most healthiest thing for you? All of these factors are epigenetic. Those are all signals coming from the outside. And I can't tell you how much of a shift, like, I didn't even know this information when I moved. Like, Spirit kind of made me move out of Winnipeg just in time for our global quarantine. And I can't tell you how much of a difference it's made just to my emotional well-being, to my mental well-being, to be in a small town that only has like a little over 10,000 people, as opposed to being in a city of 1 million. I was in the heart of downtown of a city of 1 million people. And I know that that's a small compared to some places like Los Angeles or, New York and stuff like that. Like the capacity of people creates a concentrated field of energy and of consciousness. And that if you're in a unhealthy field of consciousness, that in and of itself is going to limit your capacity of growth. Or it's going to, and I can just say from my experiences being in Winnipeg for even a few years, especially towards the end, I was noticing that it was just like the amount of time that I would have to spend meditating and exercising and all of this stuff on a daily basis. It was like I was just barely trying to get to that place of feeling okay, and the environment was pulling me down actively. And now I'm in an environment that actually supports me in elevating more. I don't even have to, I still meditate and I still exercise, but it's like I'm lifting higher and higher every day, as opposed to, constantly just feeling like I'm being pulled down. So you have to be mindful of your environment really clearly in this way. Sasha just said sleep is so important to epigenetics as well. And I absolutely, and I would say, living where I used to live, there was a train and traffic outside my window all the time. It kept me up a lot at night. And that was something that really affected my energy as well. We're going to bring this call to a close here, or bring the workshop here, the main bulk of it, to a conclusion. And I want to say that over this next month, we want to invite you to use this information to update your inner GPS and even your outer GPS, like paying attention to how your environment is steering you, how your responses to your environment are facilitating your behavior. And we really want to make this, or we want to invite you to make this a priority for yourself, right? Because the nature of Cancer and Capricorn together invites us to balance our work and home life commitments. So you have to ask yourself, where is stress causing you to suffer? Where is your fear causing you to suffer, causing you to limit yourself? Go deep into it. What is the root cause of stress, of the stress in your life? And really in this moment, like, make a commitment to yourself, and actually maybe all of us together, we can just collectively as a group here, as a community, as a spirit family, let's make a commitment to ourselves to relax, to breathe into our fullness and to open to love. And really go out of your way to try and find and receive some new signals in your life that changes the way that you feel. You know, if you on a daily basis spend an hour in an evening looking at or watching YouTube videos about this kind of thing, or looking at memes, or doing this kind of stuff, or, you know, that kind of stuff, whatever it is, ask yourself if that's in the highest resonance for you, and maybe try and adopt some new signals. Maybe half an hour of that time could be reading a book, or longer, or maybe, you know, watching. It's like, okay, I watched some funny videos on YouTube. Now let me at least watch some wisdom videos, right? Let me learn something new. Let me start to integrate something that I'm very interested in, and ask yourself, what are you interested in, and explore that. And I'll say too, one of our last slides here is, if this is of interest to you, I highly recommend, I cannot recommend enough, engaging in this very material, The Biology of Belief. If you want to go deeper, please support Dr. Bruce Lipton by reading The Biology of Belief or listening to the audiobook, which is absolutely amazing. I'll say personally, I haven't even fully read the book yet. I've actually only started, but the audiobook I went through last week, and it's only like 3 hours and 20 minutes or something like that. It's a very condensed experience, hitting just like the most critical parts of the research. And it was so profound. I remember it was like I went for a walk, and I went for like basically a 3-hour walk, and I'm walking around, and if anybody had seen me, I probably looked very silly, because I'd be walking and then I'd suddenly just like hands in my face, at the Home Alone face, being like, oh my God, that is a game changer. This is so profound. It was so intense and so beautiful. And so I highly recommend engaging in this material fully. And so with that, we now bring ourselves to one of the best parts of these Wisdom Moon calls is our open circle. We'll take a few minutes here to have kind of an opening for the group and the whole community. If there's any questions, comments, anything to share, and we'd love to hear from you now and have a brief period of community engagement here. So as always with these calls, actually, in case, and for everyone who's new as well, there's a blue raise your hand button inside of Zoom, or you can actually be on the camera and you just go like this, and we'll get you unmuted if there's anything anyone wants to share. All right, we got Antoine and then Curtis.
Okay, dude. So I gotta know what book was it you were talking about?
It's called The Biology of Belief.
The Biology of Belief. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Curtis, do you want to jump in?
Hello. I just want to say a big thank you. Referring back to our last manifestation moon and my security, I went last Friday to the immigration center, and it was the absolute best case scenario. The lady looked at me. She was like, anybody that comes into this building wants exactly this to happen. So I basically can work wherever I want to now. I have until October time. And there was a wonderful synchronicity. I stood up and I was thanking them, like, vivaciously, of course. I was so stoked. And I looked behind her, and there was a picture of Ganesha. And I was like, Ganesha? She's like, yeah. And I have a huge Ganesha tattoo on my back. I was like, I made a little joke about how Ganesha always had my back. It was just a wonderful moment. And I just wanted to thank everybody for that added support and energy in manifesting that. So thank you.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. Rachel, do you want to jump in?
Unmute self. I actually just wanted to ask if there was any chance of getting access to your slides before it goes up, like from this presentation, because there's a lot of stuff I'd love to reread, but it's 1 a.m. Well, now it's 3 a.m. my time, and brain like a Pooh Bear. I'm not going to remember a lot of stuff. So, and it's an impromptu ayahuasca ceremony that I got notice of today. It's like, oh, if you want to a waitlist is cleared, and if you want to join, it's 3 days from Friday. So I've got like a quick 3-day prep before going down into it. So I would just love to be able to have a reread of these slides if possible, if there was any chance of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great idea, and I will export all of our previous Wisdom Moons as well as today as a PDF, and I'll set them as a download inside of the or inside the Wisdom Moon module inside of this. I keep wanting to say Discord, but inside of Spirit Mysteries, and we'll make that available so that you can find it and review all of the slides. That'd be great.
Oh, you rock. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Ash. So everyone, this is Ash. He is actually one of our video editors for a lot of the different projects that we do. So Ash, you have the floor.
Hey everybody. Just wanted to say, hello to everyone who I don't know. Nice to meet you all and see your faces. Always nice to see people who are actively seeking more and wanting to grow. It just means that your spirit has recognized the flower that it truly is, and it just wants to bloom. So much love and respect to everyone for that. I wanted to share something about the biology of belief. So I bought that book, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago. And I wanted to kind of take some pressure off my family, because we've had quite a history of cancer in the family. So it was like my great-granddad, my granddad. My mother didn't die of cancer, but she had cancer. Her brother, so it's quite rife throughout immediate generations. And so through reading that book, I wanted to help my sisters, because for years, have heard them always say, we need to be careful. It's in our genetics. We are susceptible to it. So I went with them with the information of really sharing the idea of notions behind the biology of belief, to which both my sisters were actually arguing against me, like I was telling them something that was negative for them. And I was like, no, look, if you accept what I'm saying, I'm not saying just blindly accept it, but if you do, this is liberating. It removes those things that you think are problems for you. And I'll also share that my eldest sister is like an award-winning biologist, molecular biologist and scientist background. Right? She won awards at university level. And she's also a mindfulness coach that does NLP and all these. So she's from a scientific and, neural linguistic background. But she was still very much rejecting this and like, no, that's not true. Then fast forward, 3 years from that point, I get a message from my sister, because I openly have conversations or ask questions to trigger spiritual notions in her work. I get a call from her to say, Ash, you need to get this book. It's amazing, you'll love it. So I'm like, oh, what's this book? She's like, The Biology of Belief. So it was really funny, because it was like 3 years later, and now she was telling me, did you know that it's actually the environment that affects the cells? And she's been a molecular biologist working in laboratories for many years, and treating me as if I was coming with some silly, notions that were fantastical and not really tangible. And so she's now applies that to her work, and she helps athletes do. She's like a personal trainer, but she trains the mind too. So she helps people who perform as in competition athletes and stuff. And she's took that into her work now, and now it helps her tenfold with all of the people that she works with. It was really funny, because like I said, she rejected it very much because it was coming from her younger brother, who was, she perceived on a bit of a hippie path, So I found that was really powerful when she came back to me with that. So I just wanted to share that story, really.
That is really funny, actually. And I guess she just forgot, or did you? I mean, she forgot that you brought it up in the first place.
Yeah, she just completely forgot that I brought that up, or the people who I was talking about. Because I didn't necessarily say read this book. I told her what it was from, but she was just very reject because of the notions of the ideas. It's like, no, it's silly. Stop saying it. It's dangerous for us to think that, because then we won't take preventatives to getting cancer. So I was like, oh my God, no, that's the exact thing that will cause the cell to get sick. So she was thinking what I was saying was dangerous. dangerous. To them.
That's amazing. Yeah, as Patricia wrote here, we can only show them the door, right? They have to be the ones to walk through.
Exactly,
It's true for everyone. It's true for all of us too. It's actually really, really great to be humble in that state, to remember that, you know, we're not saviors. We're not here to save other people, but to really save ourselves, to elevate ourselves and support everybody in recognizing that they have that power within them. Because otherwise it just facilitates that same cycle of people relying on you or someone else to do the work for them. And we all must really strive for empowerment, of empowering ourselves collectively to be the creators that we really are inside.
Very much guidance rather than anything. It's, you can just guide. And I make a point of anyone who I work with doing therapy sessions that when they think they came here and got some healing, and I'm saying, well, no, you brought yourself here, so you decided, not me. You started it. And because people tend to feel better for some reason about giving the healing to someone that was there that they healed in the presence of, or started that motion. So I find you have to always point out that it's them and not you.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Okay, well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us on yet another fabulous Wisdom Moon. It was such a blessing to share in the sacred space with you all. And although we bring this sacred container to a close, and we humbly thank our Ascended Master guides and spirit guides for being present with us, please take this energy with you for the rest of this day and moving forward through this week to support you in making all of your dreams come true and elevating global consciousness everywhere through the good works and deeds that you bring into the world. So thank you, everybody, so much, and please be blessed and have a beautiful rest of your day.